Hello, my name is Keith Williams. I'm with my colleague Bob Fox. We're hoping that in the time that we have, that we want to be able to share some of our personal and our professional perspectives, both as people with disabilities and working with people with disabilities, so that you, future employers, the public in general, anyone involved in the hiring process or business community, will realize what a good idea it is to recruit, hire, and train people with disabilities to increase the diversity of your workforce and to modernize your workforce.
Hi, I'm work with Keith, as he mentioned, and we work for the Center for Independent Living in Scranton, MyCell. And I had a stroke when I was in my 20s. I was actually 5 days before my 27th birthday when I had a massive stroke. So it was a bit of a shock to me, as you can imagine. But after that, I came up with a plan for my future, and part of that was working. But before I could work, I had to get my degree, and that was also my plan. So I started out actually here at Lackawanna College, and I graduated in 2001 with an associate's degree in human services. And then I went on to Penn State Worthington at the time, Worthington Scranton campus, and I got my human development bachelor's degree. And I did my internship at the Center for Independent Living, and that was back in 2005. And I've been with them ever since. When it came to working, I needed some reasonable accommodations. And I decided to, well, actually what I did is I was finding that I was having a difficult time with typing, as you can imagine, using just one hand. So I went to my supervisor and said, you know, I looked it up and they have one-handed keyboards. And so I mentioned it to her, and the cost was $99. So it wasn't that expensive. And a little bit of a learning curve for me to use, because there's all these different modes, as you can imagine. They split the alphabet in half, and then they split the numbers, and so. But it worked out for me. It really did. It allowed me to type faster. So.
And it gives you an idea of some of the accommodations that are available, and sometimes homemade ones are the best. And as Bob said, some of the most effective ones are the least expensive. In terms of my own situation, I have a congenital disability. It's what's called arthrogryposis. It's a neuromuscular disability. So as you can see, I basically don't walk, and I have limited upper body strength in my arms and very limited dexterity in my hands. But I've learned through trial and error the kinds of accommodations that work for me. It's funny, you know, they talk about the road less traveled and how so many of us have a different career change down the road that we didn't expect. And that's true of me, but I'm glad that the turns worked out the way they did. I have my bachelor's degree in communications from King's College, and I have a master's in human resources administration from the University of Scranton. I was originally interested in getting into radio, hence the communications degree. I always had an interest in broadcasting, but I quickly realized that there were too many knobs, buttons, dials in the control room and the radio booth for broadcasting that was impractical for me. So I stayed in that major, got towards writing, and that's helped me in my career since at the Center for Independent Living. Where I'm the advocacy and outreach coordinator, working to promote compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the hiring of qualified people with disabilities in the workplace, and just general community advocacy and community education. I have a conventional desktop keyboard, mouse setup at work and at home, and I'm able to use a long dowel. It's just a simple 13, 14-inch piece of wood with a bit of rubber at the end of it, homemade from any of the do-it-yourself supply stores in the area, very common, and I just tap with my mouth. To kind of hear it, it seems somewhat crude, but I had a lot of practice doing it in college, and fortunately have been able to build up my speed and proficiency at using that, and surprisingly is even more accurate than using voice recognition. I've tried voice recognition. It works to a point, but then I would find myself editing and correcting some of the errors from voice recognition with the mouse stick. So for me, for expedience worth, I just use that all the way through. I use a little wooden block that someone at our employer, the Center for Independent Living, cut for me to put the platform, to put the keyboard on that, so I don't have to bend down as far as typing. These are very common accommodations that are available and used both throughout Pennsylvania and nationally. And I think it's also important to note that we're in human services. Obviously, we're with people with disabilities, working with people with disabilities, and we have disabilities ourselves. But if there's one thing that I think that's important and can't be stressed too strongly, can't be overemphasized, is the need to refrain from typecasting or pigeonholing people with disabilities. So just because somebody may have a disability of some kind that's readily apparent, or whether it's not, but they talk about having a disability themselves, I don't believe that that person should automatically be typecasted, and the assumption should be made that they're only going to be working with people with disabilities. We all have interests. We all have diverse interests, some the same, some different from everybody else. And provided that the person is qualified, whether or not they need some kind of a reasonable accommodation, that person should be considered for the job that they are interested in applying for.
So with that in mind, I'd like to mention just a couple things, a couple acronyms that are affiliated with folks with disabilities working. The Department of Labor has a very good website that provides a lot of information for employers. And if you go to their disability resources and then hiring individuals with disabilities page, you'll find all this information that I'm about to mention. I've just picked out a couple things that I've used before, but one acronym is EARN. And that service helps individuals who are, HR individuals, helping to recruit and hire and maintain folks with disabilities in the workplace. And then another one is called JAN, which is the Job Accommodation Network. And they provide expert help for employers looking for accommodations for certain types of disabilities. I mean, you go into their website, they break it down by disability. And so it'll give you an idea. You can't pigeonhole that person that they have spinal bifida. This is the issue, but it'll give you a general idea of what they may be dealing with. Okay, and then another one is OVR, or the Pennsylvania OVR. OVR stands for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and they are a state agency that helps individuals find employment. And they come in to help that person if there is a barrier to employment. I forgot to mention earlier, but I used OVR services when I first had the stroke. They literally had someone in my room at Allied Services within a couple of days of me going there, being admitted there. So that started my journey with them, and they helped me to go to school and then find a job. So. But they have a new component to what they do, which is a business services rep. And every district office in the Commonwealth has one. And all you have to do is reach out to that person if they haven't tried to reach out to you yet. And it's a great person to be in touch with because they want to hire folks with disabilities. I know you want to hire folks with disabilities, so it's a good connection to have. But two things also that I want to mention. There are two tax credits that are available for employers. The first one is the work opportunity tax credit, and that is for certain targeted populations the business can get tax credits if they hire that person. One of them is referrals from vocational rehabilitation. Okay. The second one is the disabled access program or tax credit, which is a $5,000 non-refundable tax credit. But that, in its name, access, it provides access for folks with disabilities to be able to work in that environment wherever they get a job. So it could be, for example, someone who needs interpreters, or if there's architectural work that needs to be done in the office in order to provide a ramp for that person, that is there for that person.
I think if somebody with a disability who I was talking to, even if it wasn't the same as mine, but just having a disability in general, asked about advice or what they should do when they're ready to go out there and start looking for work, is I would say to be persistent. And obviously that's something that we might hear anybody say to give advice with or without a disability. But sometimes, and everybody is a little bit different, but for some people with disabilities, they've often not even had the opportunity to be interviewed, let alone start the job. Whether it's a lack of the perception that they lack experience or the capabilities. And again, these are just some people. Others are able to get interviews right away or on a list just as somebody without a disability. But I think persistence will eventually pay off. And if you're talented in a certain area, you want to build on that experience, and you can increase the diversity of that workplace. I think that with a little faith and believing in yourself and that persistence, it will eventually pay off.
One thing I have noticed in working with consumers in the last number of years is when it comes to employment and interviewing, that they lack the confidence. And that's one thing that I really work with individuals on is, to be confident. Just because you have a disability, doesn't mean you have to, not have any confidence. I mean, that's a big part of it in any interview is how you carry yourself and show that you are interested in the job and that you can do the job.
If an employer asked me for advice in terms of hiring somebody with a disability and someone is seated opposite their desk or in their work area, their cubicle or office space, boardroom, what have you, and doing an interview, I wouldn't go so far as to say pretend that the disability isn't there if it's readily apparent. I'm saying in the case that you can see it, because obviously you can't ignore the disability. My advice would be is it's okay to acknowledge someone has a disability, but look beyond it. Don't let that be the elephant in the room. Don't let the disability be the overriding concern in the front of your mind as you're asking questions to that job applicant, the same questions that you would ask to everybody else. Don't presuppose. Don't be thinking to yourself, well, he has a disability. I'm wondering if he can do this job because I know that the tasks and the essential functions and responsibility are A, B, C, D, E. Go in there with an open mind. It's okay to see the disability. Just make sure that you see the person and their abilities. during the interview process.
That's a great point. That is a great point. And I guess I can look at my personal situation and say, if you looked on paper, I mean, and you heard that I had a massive stroke, well, you have certain ideas that, oh, this person can't do this, they can't do that, you know. But when you get to know me and you realize that, well, maybe he can do a lot of these things, you know. So that's the whole idea, is to, I mean, we know that you can't ask someone about their disability, especially in an interview or anything like that. But if look at that, and if it's a disability like mine that comes along for the ride, that's what I tell people, right? So I walk in the room, well, you know, Keith and I, we can't hide our disabilities,
Right.
okay? This is part of who we are. But give that person a chance in the interview. Ask them questions, you know, related to the position, and what you think they can do and all that. Have a good conversation, you know, and then make your decision based on, you know, what is required of the job.